word of life.
Every family has its drama, right? Its rivalries, its conflicts. But what if your family was literally the first family on Earth? Today, we are jumping into one of the most foundational stories ever told, the tale of the world's first two brothers, Cain and Abel. So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with that first sibling rivalry, which then gets way more intense over a rejected offering. That leads to a terrible crime, a really complex punishment, and then we'll follow Cain's lineage before seeing how this story offers a new beginning.
All right, let's set the scene. Adam and Eve are out of Eden, and they have their first kids, Cain, the older brother, and Abel, the younger. This is it, the dawn of the next generation of humanity.
Right away, they fall into these two classic roles. You've got Cain, the farmer, working the soil, planting things. And then you have Abel, the shepherd, tending the flocks. You know, this is a really ancient tension, the farmer versus the nomad. And this very simple difference in what they do for a living, well, it's the tiny seed that the whole conflict is going to grow from.
The whole story really pivots on this one moment of worship. Both brothers decide, hey, let's make an offering to God, a gift from our work. But this act, which should be about piety, instead becomes the spark for some serious jealousy.
Now pay attention to the wording here, because it's really important. Cain brings fruit of the ground. Simple, right? But Abel, he brings the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. The language suggests he's bringing the absolute best of what he has, the first and the finest. It hints that maybe there's a difference in attitude behind these two gifts. And the reaction from God could not be more different. Abel's offering gets the thumbs up. Cain's gets rejected. Now, the text never actually tells us why. Was it the quality of the gift, the attitude of the giver? We don't know for sure. But the outcome is crystal clear, and it changes everything. Cain's reaction is just visceral. He is very wroth. We're talking deep, burning anger, and his face literally falls. You can just picture it. This is that moment where rejection turns into a dark, simmering resentment, a feeling I think we've all felt at some point. Now, in response to this anger, God doesn't just condemn Cain. He gives him a warning, and more importantly, a choice. Sin is described like this beast, a predator, crouching right at his door, waiting to pounce. But Cain is told, you can rule over it. You have a choice here. The ball is in his court. So let's get to the tragic outcome of that choice. Because that simmering anger, it's about to boil over into action, and it leads to the violent, absolutely heartbreaking climax of this whole story. The text is just so blunt, so direct, and so devastating. Cain doesn't master sin. Sin masters him. He kills his brother. This is the first human death in the entire biblical narrative. And it's not from sickness or an accident. It's from the hand of a brother. And what comes next is this incredible confrontation. God asks, where is your brother Abel? Now, obviously, this isn't a question for information. It's an invitation. It's one last chance for Cain to confess, to own up to what he's done. And Cain's response? Man, this line has echoed through thousands of years. First, a lie. I don't know. And then this defiant, sarcastic question. Am I my brother's keeper? He denies both knowledge and responsibility in a single breath. The reply is just haunting. It's this powerful, poetic image that you can't hide a crime like this. The very earth that soaked up Abel's blood is crying out for justice. It's a universe where murder literally makes the ground scream. So, the crime's out in the open. Now comes the punishment. But you know, the consequences for Cain are way more complicated than you might think. It involves a curse, for sure, but also a really strange kind of mercy. The punishment is tailor-made for the crime. Cain, the man who works the ground, is now cursed by the ground. It won't grow food for him anymore. He's sentenced to a life of exile, a wanderer, totally disconnected from his land, his home, his identity. And Cain just falls apart. He's in total despair. He's not just sad about his sentence, he's terrified. He's convinced that as a homeless outcast, the first person who finds him will kill him in an act of blood vengeance. And this is where the story takes a wild twist. Instead of just letting that happen, God issues a decree. Anyone who kills Cain will have vengeance taken on them 7 times over. Think about that. It's an act that stops the cycle of eye for an eye revenge before it even gets started. So this brings us to the famous Mark of Cain. And this is so important because it's so often misunderstood. The mark isn't a brand of shame. According to the text, it's actually a sign of divine protection. It's a warning to everyone else. Do not touch this man. Despite what he's done, human revenge is off the table. But the story doesn't just end there, with Cain wandering off into the wilderness. No, he becomes a builder, a father, and the start of a whole family line that carries the echoes of his violence forward.
And this leads to a pretty wild paradox. Cain, the fugitive, doesn't just get by. He thrives. He settles down, has a son, and then, get this, he builds the world's first city. Just pause and think about that. The first murderer is also the first city builder. Anyway, a few generations go by and we meet his descendant, Lamech. And if you thought Cain was bad, Lamech takes things to a whole new level. He boasts to his wives in this absolutely chilling poem. See, Cain was protected by God's decree of sevenfold vengeance. Lamech proudly declares his own standard of 77-fold vengeance. He's privatized revenge and made it way worse. I mean, just look at the escalation here. What started as a divine protection for Cain has turned into a human boast of insane, disproportionate revenge from Lamech. It shows a society where violence is now a badge of honor. The line of Cain isn't just surviving, it's creating a culture where brutality keeps getting dialed up. So with Abel dead and Cain's descendants spiraling into violence, you have to wonder, is this it? Is this the only legacy for humanity? Well, the story circles back to Adam and Eve to show us another path. They have another son, Seth. Eve sees him as a replacement for Abel, and his family line becomes the counterpoint to Cain's. It's from Seth's line that people begin to call upon the name of the Lord. It's a note of hope. And that leaves us with this incredible, thought-provoking puzzle. The story gives us two paths, one of escalating violence that paradoxically builds cities and civilization, and another of faith. From the very first murder came the very first city. What does this ancient story of crime and creation tell us about the complicated and maybe contradictory foundations that our own world is built on?